Hey everyone, I'm so glad to see you all. By the way, where are you watching from? I'm from Texas, America. Write in the comments, I look forward to your comments. It's so exciting to know where you're all from. Maya Jenkins had always been an extraordinary student, even as a child. Growing up in a modest neighborhood where resources were limited, she stood out not only for her curiosity but also for her persistence. She was the kind of girl who read every book she could get her hands on, even if she had to borrow them from neighbors, friends, or the public library. Her world was filled with the thrill of discovering new things about the solar system, about historical events, about complex ideas that she somehow knew she would need to understand one day. But more than anything, Maya was driven. She saw education as her way to move beyond the barriers of her world, the limitations her family faced daily, and the unspoken, often invisible boundaries that existed around kids like her. She knew the statistics. Black kids from working-class families didn't usually make it to Ivy League schools. They weren't typically the ones people expected to be doctors, scientists, or lawyers. But Maya had long since decided that she wasn't going to let those expectations define her. She wanted to break the mold, to achieve something that no one else thought possible. Her mother, Angela, was her biggest cheerleader. Angela had always wanted to be a teacher herself, but life had taken her down a different path. Instead, she worked as a nurse at the local clinic and held a second job as a night shift cashier at the nearby convenience store. Angela never once let Maya feel the weight of their financial challenges. She would often come home with small surprises: a new book, a set of highlighters, or a workbook she had picked up on clearance, determined to keep Maya's love for learning alive. For Angela, Maya's education wasn't just about grades, it was about opportunity, the kind of opportunity she had never had. As middle school ended and high school loomed, Maya knew exactly where she wanted to go: Lakeside Preparatory Academy. Lakeside was more than a school, it was an institution, a prestigious beacon of opportunity in their town. Known for its Ivy League acceptance rates, impressive alumni network, and state-of-the-art facilities, Lakeside Preparatory was where the brightest and best students from affluent families went to prepare for top-tier universities. It had produced senators, CEOs, scientists, and renowned artists. Maya saw it as the doorway to her future, a place where she could finally challenge herself to the fullest and maybe find a way out of the barriers that held her family back. The morning of the Lakeside Preparatory open house dawned bright and clear. Maya and her mother woke up early, dressed in their best clothes, and took the bus across town. Maya clutched her notebook and pen, a habit she had developed whenever she was excited to learn something new. As the bus neared the school, her stomach flipped with nerves. But she kept her face calm, trying to focus on the future she envisioned for herself. Lakeside was unlike anything she had ever seen. The campus stretched across acres, with perfectly manicured lawns, towering trees, and grand buildings that looked like they belonged on a college campus. Maya and her mother were greeted by a massive stone archway bearing the school's motto, Per Aspera ad Astra, through hardships to the stars. Maya felt a thrill run through her. It felt like a promise, a message just for her. Inside, the school lobby was bustling with parents and students, all dressed in expensive clothes, with an air of confidence that made Maya feel acutely out of place. Parents exchanged smiles and nodded to one another in that knowing way of people who belong, and students chatted about their plans, their goals, their dreams, all with the certainty that these dreams would of course come true. Maya looked around, trying to ignore the way people stared at her and her mother. Their clothes were neat but simple, and Angela's nurse scrubs peeked out from beneath her jacket, a silent reminder of the double shifts she'd pulled to make this visit possible. Maya noticed the sideways glances, the way some people's eyes lingered a little too long, and the few whispers that seemed to follow them as they walked by. Angela leaned down and whispered in Maya's ear, "Ignore them, baby. They don't know who you are." Maya nodded, lifting her chin a bit higher. She clutched the admissions packet the receptionist had handed her and followed her mother through the hallways, taking in everything with a sense of awe. The classrooms were filled with advanced equipment lab stations with rows of gleaming beakers, rows of brand new computers, and pristine art supplies. A guide, a young woman with a polished, professional air, led them from room to room, explaining the resources available at Lakeside. "This is our biology lab," the guide said, gesturing to a room filled with microscopes and glass cabinets full of preserved specimens. "Our students conduct research projects every semester. We encourage hands-on learning here at Lakeside." Maya's eyes lit up as she scanned the room. She imagined herself sitting at one of those desks, peering through a microscope, discovering the intricacies of biology. But as she turned to the guide with a question, she noticed something that made her hesitate. The guide's expression was polite but dismissive, her eyes cool as they landed on Maya, as if she didn't quite see her as a future Lakeside student. Maya asked anyway, "Are there any clubs for students interested in medicine or biology?" The guide hesitated. "Well, we do have several science clubs, but they're very competitive. Most of our students have been with us since middle school, and they have extensive backgrounds in these subjects." Angela, sensing Maya's disappointment, squeezed her shoulder. "Maya has been studying biology on her own for years," she said proudly. "I'm sure she'd be a great fit for any of your clubs." The guide gave a tight smile. Of course. As they continued the tour, Maya noticed more subtle slights. Teachers barely acknowledged her, students stared or whispered behind her back, and one staff member openly questioned whether she and her mother were familiar with Lakeside's tuition rates. Every time, Maya felt her heart sink a little more. She couldn't help but wonder if her dreams were slipping further away, right before her eyes. Finally, they reached the main office, where they were introduced to Mr. Langford, the admissions officer. He was tall and impeccably dressed, with a sharp, assessing gaze. He looked at Maya and Angela with an expression that was more cold calculation than welcome. "Ms. Jenkins, I just want to make sure you're aware of the rigorous standards we hold here at Lakeside," he began, his tone smooth but dismissive. "Many of our students come from highly educated families and have been preparing for Lakeside for years. It's a particular environment, you see. Not everyone thrives here." Angela squared her shoulders. Maya has been one of the top students in her class for years. She's more than ready for Lakeside. Mr. Langford raised an eyebrow. "It's not just about grades, Ms. Jenkins. Lakeside values, cultural fit." The word struck Maya like a blow. Cultural fit. She had heard those words before, whispered by people who thought she couldn't hear them. They were code words, a polite way of saying that she didn't belong. That people like her were somehow lesser. She could feel her mother bristling beside her. Her lips pressed into a thin line. But Maya didn't let it show. Instead, she looked Mr. Langford in the eye, her voice steady. "I'll apply, Mr. Langford. And when I get accepted, I'll prove that I belong here." Angela placed a supportive hand on her daughter's shoulder, her pride unmistakable. They left the office with heads held high, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling of being judged, of being unwelcome in a place that should have been open to anyone with the drive to succeed. A week later, the letter arrived. Maya's heart pounded as she tore it open, her mother watching her closely. She read the words and her heart sank after careful review. "We regret to inform you that we cannot offer admission to Lakeside Preparatory Academy." Angela took the letter from her, reading it over. She hugged Maya tightly. "It's their loss," she whispered fiercely, but Maya could see the hurt in her mother's eyes. And then, as if fate was rubbing salt in the wound, Maya started hearing about other students who had been accepted students with lower grades, with no particular passion for learning, but with families who had the right connections or the right amount of money. Her friend from middle school, Sarah, casually mentioned her acceptance to Lakeside despite her average grades, saying her father had made a donation to the school last year. It was then that Maya realized her rejection wasn't about her lack of potential. It was about who she was. Lakeside had seen her potential, and decided that she wasn't worth their time, not because she didn't meet their academic standards, but because she didn't fit their vision of a perfect Lakeside student. But instead of letting that rejection break her, Maya felt a new fire ignite within her. She would succeed, maybe not at Lakeside, but somewhere else. And she would make sure that one day, Lakeside would regret ever denying her a place among them. Maya hadn't expected rejection to come with such a hollow ache. The blow from Lakeside stung, but what came after weeks of whispered rumors, side glances, and the knowing looks from her peers who had been accepted turned that sting into a searing, unyielding pain. Everyone knew, of course. News traveled fast in their small neighborhood. Some neighbors offered words of comfort, but others just shook their heads, some even smirking as if they'd known all along. "A place like that wasn't made for us," one woman told Angela at the grocery store, her voice laced with a bitter acceptance that cut deeper than any insult. For Maya, the rejection festered like a wound. Her days, once filled with unbroken focus on her studies, were now punctuated by flashes of anger and frustration. She'd stare at her textbooks and imagine the shiny new facilities at Lakeside, the opportunities she'd missed, the resources she'd never get to experience. But with that pain, an even stronger resolve started taking root. One night, Angela came into Maya's room carrying a cup of tea. She noticed her daughter hunched over her desk, surrounded by stacks of books and notebooks filled with her meticulous handwriting. "Baby, it's late," Angela said gently, placing the tea on the corner of her desk. You're pushing yourself too hard. You don't have to prove anything to those people. Maya looked up, her eyes tired but determined. But I do, Mom, she whispered. If I don't, then they win. They want me to feel like I don't belong anywhere, like there's some invisible line I'll never be able to cross. I have to prove to them, to everyone, that I can. Angela sighed and stroked her daughter's cheek. You don't owe them anything, Maya. But if this is what you need to do, then I'm here with you, every step of the way. Angela's support was a balm for Maya, yet she still carried the rejection like a stone in her chest. The next day she gathered herself together, put on her bravest face, and went to school as if nothing had happened. But even as she tried to focus on her studies, the sting of the rejection letter haunted her, leaving her mind restless and her heart unsettled. A few days later, she found herself sitting in the school library, flipping through the pages of a history book she had read a dozen times before. It was then that Ms. Fletcher, the librarian, approached her. Ms. Fletcher was one of the few adults who seemed to understand Maya's drive. She was an older woman with kind eyes, and she had always encouraged Maya's love of reading, often setting aside books she thought Maya would find interesting. You seem troubled, Maya Ms. Fletcher said, pulling up a chair beside her. Is everything all right? Maya hesitated, unsure whether to share her disappointment. But as she looked into Ms. Fletcher's compassionate eyes, she felt a surge of honesty. I didn't get into Lakeside, she said softly. They didn't want me. And the worst part is, I know it wasn't about my grades or my abilities. Ms. Fletcher listened quietly, her gaze steady and supportive. Lakeside isn't the only place you can succeed, you know, she said after a pause. People like us often face doors that seem locked, sometimes bolted shut. But that doesn't mean you have to let those doors dictate your path. Maya frowned. But how can I make them see? I want to show them that they were wrong about me. Ms. Fletcher gave a small, knowing smile. You make them see by succeeding anyway, by finding a path that's yours, not theirs. But don't let bitterness cloud your vision, Maya. There's a difference between fighting for what's right and letting anger consume you. Those words stayed with Maya, and she found herself reflecting on them in the days that followed. She realized that Ms. Fletcher was right. She didn't have to be defined by Lakeside's rejection. If she allowed herself to be ruled by resentment, she'd be giving Lakeside power over her future. So she poured herself into her studies with renewed vigor, dedicating herself to learning not for Lakeside, but for herself. As the weeks passed, Maya's reputation as an exceptional student began to grow even more. Teachers took note of her determination, her classmates were astounded by her focus, and soon enough, Maya found herself being asked to tutor other students in subjects they struggled with. She became a quiet, steady leader, someone her peers looked up to, even if they didn't fully understand her drive. But Maya's life took another unexpected turn when she was invited to attend a small community event on a Saturday morning. It was an education fair hosted at a local community center, organized by a group called Future Minds. They were an organization committed to helping young students from underprivileged backgrounds gain access to resources, mentorship, and educational opportunities beyond the limitations of their schools. At the event, Maya met a variety of people, mentors, professionals, and students from schools like hers who were all passionate about education and driven to make a difference. For the first time since Lakeside's rejection, Maya felt a sense of belonging. These were people who understood her struggles, who shared her ambitions, and who didn't look at her as though she didn't belong. One mentor in particular, Dr. Elijah Carter, stood out. He was a successful lawyer who had grown up in the same neighborhood as Maya, and he spoke with a fire and intensity that resonated deeply with her. You're going to face people who look at you and think they know everything about you, Dr. Carter said, his gaze piercing and direct. They'll make judgments based on nothing but their own prejudice. But the key is not to prove them wrong, Maya. The key is to make sure you're proud of who you are, every step of the way. Don't let their ignorance limit your potential. Maya listened, her heart pounding with a new kind of resolve. Here was someone who had faced the same barriers she was facing, and had come out stronger. Dr. Carter introduced her to other students and mentors, each one sharing stories of the discrimination they had overcome and the successes they had achieved despite it. Each story was like a piece of armor, strengthening Maya against the wounds of her own rejection. Inspired by the event, Maya threw herself even harder into her studies, but with a new perspective. Her goal was no longer just about proving Lakeside wrong. It was about proving to herself that she was capable, no matter who tried to stand in her way. And as she worked, she found herself connecting with other students who shared her passion for learning. Over time, Maya began organizing small study groups for students who struggled academically. She helped them with homework, shared study tips, and created a community where students could support one another. Her home became a haven for her peers, a place where they could learn without feeling judged or looked down upon. Angela would often come home from work to find the living room filled with kids, their heads bent over textbooks and notebooks as Maya guided them through math problems or quizzed them on science concepts. Angela was endlessly proud of her daughter. She saw how Maya's resilience and drive had transformed her pain into something productive, something beautiful. But she also worried about the toll it was taking on her. Late at night, when the house was quiet and Maya's friends had gone home, Angela would find her daughter still at her desk, poring over books or working on her next tutoring plan. Angela tried to encourage Maya to take breaks, to relax, but Maya's sense of purpose was unshakable. Meanwhile, word of Maya's success began to spread. Teachers and administrators at her school took notice of her efforts, and soon enough, she was being approached with opportunities she hadn't anticipated. A local college professor heard about her tutoring group and invited her to attend a weekend program for high-achieving students. Maya leapt at the chance, seeing it as yet another step forward. The weekend program was transformative. It exposed Maya to new ideas, new fields of study, and students from across the state who shared her drive and ambitions. She felt as though her world was expanding, as if the barriers that had once felt so impenetrable were finally beginning to crack. But Lakeside's shadow still lingered, a reminder of the prejudice she'd faced. And as she continued her journey, she couldn't ignore the reality that there were countless others like her. Students who faced rejection and discrimination simply because of who they were. This thought gnawed at her, keeping her awake at night. She realized that if she wanted real change, it wasn't enough to succeed for herself. She needed to make a difference for others too. Her path wasn't just about breaking through for her own sake, it was about creating a world where kids like her didn't have to break down doors just to be seen. The seeds of an idea began to take root in Maya's mind. What if she could create something, some sort of initiative or organization, that would help other students like herself? What if there was a way to provide resources, mentorship, and opportunities for kids who were shut out of places like Lakeside? The thought filled her with a new kind of determination. And so, in the quiet hours of the night, Maya began laying the groundwork for what would become her greatest project yet, an organization dedicated to breaking down the barriers that had kept so many students like her from achieving their dreams. By the end of that year, Maya was no longer just a student fighting for her own future. She was a leader, an advocate, and a voice for those who had been silenced. And as she looked forward, she knew one thing for certain: no rejection, no prejudice, and no institution would ever define her worth. She would blaze her own path and bring others along with her.